Modern cognitive neuroscience tells us that our memories are about as reliable as a weatherman at your local news channel. When a couple is asked, "How did you first meet?" they are lured into romanticized reflection. They might recall locking eyes at a school dance. They might recall the night being just perfect, despite the truth being far from it. We don't remember the spilled punch, the stepped-on toes, or the stuttering. We only remember the X's and O's. Our memory doesn't find the needle by sifting through the haystack, but rather by lighting a match and setting the barn ablaze, until all that remains is the small piece of silver shining through the smoke. In this way, our memories are our best friends. They know exactly when to lie to us, feeding us misinformation about the past to satisfy ourselves in the present. Because if humans were capable of writing and recalling accurate personal accounts of their history, our memories would be stiff, unmarketable literature. And when a book gets boring, we tend to tap out. Just the same, when our lives get monotonous, we tend to give up. So we have our faulty, biased brains to thank us for our perceived happiness and fulfillment. Our inaccurate memory systems consequently help us hide trauma, contrive purpose, and infuse unique importance into an otherwise banal existence. But let it be known, not all cerebral restructurings are gifts from psychology. Some are curses from SCPs. Which of these two possibilities is more existentially terrifying is up to you. SCP-5040 is a non-existent Japanese horror film entitled Tears of Blood, which spontaneously manifests in human memories. SCP-5040 is a master of persuasion. Those affected by SCP-5040 will remember going to see the film, even when their supposed attendance would contradict empirical evidence. It manipulates the mind into unwavering faith. While humans occasionally stumble upon the self-awareness to question their recollection, there are no documented instances of an individual doubting this specific memory. Somehow, beyond the Foundation's understanding, SCP-5040 manages to suspend the skepticism of its victims. They accept the memory as canon, as brute fact. Victims of SCP-5040 do not need a ticket stub to know they have been to the theater, and SCP-5040 afflictions can occur any place where movies are shown. It even transcends laws and navigates social norms. In cultures where its content would usually be prohibited by regulations and frowned upon by the public, it still inserts itself into the memory of its prey, and once that memory is planted, it's an event that can't be forgotten. Like the birth of your first child, like your favorite football team winning the Super Bowl, like the employee number you punch in and out of work every day for the rest of your life. It stamps itself into the forefront of the subject's brain, waving its arm, pleading to be recognized, begging for attention. Descriptions of the film are always similar in nature, as are the circumstances and events surrounding the viewing. However, reports of SCP-5040's story and characters are never fully consistent from one subject to the next, and the film's setting, subplots, character names, and much of the dialogue are different for each viewer. Whether this is SCP-5040's intent or inadequacy is unclear. Casting also varies and appears largely arbitrary. A broad variety of Japanese performers and entertainment personalities, both living and deceased, have been said to star in the film, even when the actor in question has no real-life associations with the horror genre. Imagine famous Japanese actor Pat Morita, better known as Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, being the lead in a horror film. Despite the fact this would be a noticeably strange casting decision, SCP-5040 would still be taken seriously. Despite any and all deviations from expectations of the medium, SCP-5040 is seen as legitimate. Kinks in its design are overlooked by the viewer, similar to how our sleeping selves most often don't recognize we are dreaming, even when we encounter flying horses, friends with banana fingers, and leprechauns playing Pot Limit Omaha in Chris Hemsworth's basement. This may be because, despite all of its quirks, the film's core is sturdy. Its beginning, middle, and end are always in agreement. It doesn't stray from Robert McKee's universal structure of story. Not even the sick, twisted M. Night Shyamalan himself could have created a cinematic experience quite like this. After conducting more than 300 interviews, researchers have constructed a detailed synopsis of SCP-5040's most consistent story elements, and the most common sequence of events associated with the viewer's memory of their screening attendance. There is no matinee with this movie. Screenings always begin at sunset. If there are obstacles standing in the way of the subject's attendance, SCP-5040 will see them removed. Dentist appointments, drinks with a friend, a long procrastinated date with the treadmill. All these commitments for that day and time will be pushed down the subject's list of priorities, making way for the movie. They will learn that their plans have been canceled or resolved one way or another. The dentist's office burned to the ground. Your friend is suddenly sober. The model of treadmills at your gym have been recalled. Somehow, some way, time is freed up. And when life is kind enough to offer respite from personal and social obligations, it is modern humans' instinct to sit down and veg out. At this moment, the subjects decide to see a movie at a nearby theater. Upon arrival, the theater looks to be an entity in its own right. Long lines of patrons are like limbs extending from its center box office. Bright, blocky letters forming the film's title run across the marquee like a cheap tattoo. It is truly madness. A frenzied crowd gathers at the box office, pushing and shoving, clawing at the glass partition for a ticket. The entire theater has been reserved for this special event, a one-time only screening of a rare, critically acclaimed film. Admission is entirely free. But is it actually free? Or has the cost just not declared itself? When the subject reaches the auditorium, they scan their eyes over the sea of people. Heads emerge from the backs of almost every seat. They can only find one empty space, and they have to shuffle like a crab to get past the mass of other viewers. In their seat, they notice that a large number of people throughout the audience are wearing disposable face masks. The woman sitting next to the subject's right wears one such mask, as does the woman on their left. And before you think, well, that isn't so weird, it's important to note that all of these accounts were taken years before certain recent events. Patrons continue to pack into the theater. Despite every chair being filled, more and more people enter. The aisles become overflow seating. Regulations of max occupancy are dismissed. In the darkness of the room, all that can be clearly seen are shapes. The rectangle that is the screen, the hundreds of circles that are the heads of the audience. But there is a shape that feels misplaced. What appears to be the letter P sticks up from the crowd, a thin line with a bulge protruding from the top. The specificity of its origin is difficult to define, but once the subject's eyes adjust to the dark, they notice it's an IV pole carrying a bag of unknown fluid. However, there is no clear indication of who it is connected to. Furthermore, they notice one of the masked audience members is wearing a hospital gown. There is little time to assess any of these strange visuals, because there are no trailers or advertisements before the film. As soon as the audience is settled into whatever space they might find temporarily habitable, the theater goes silent and the film begins. The film opens with the female protagonist going about mundane activities in her day-to-day life. A phone call interrupts her. It is an unknown party who tells her that a loved one has been hospitalized for one reason or another. The protagonist drops what she's doing to accept the call to action. On her way to the hospital, however, she is attacked by a male assailant and loses consciousness. The protagonist wakes up in a fog, unable to make sense of her surroundings, but the audience understands that wherever she is in deep trouble. She's in a desolate and unfamiliar building with her arms and legs bound. She is accompanied by a number of other female captives, some of whom still remain seemingly unconscious or possibly dead. The women briefly discuss their strategy to escape, but they are interrupted when the kidnapper appears. Descriptions of hairstyle, eye color, and wardrobe would fall short in showing us who this character really is. Instead, his swift and decisive actions do the talking. He sees one of the women crying and kills her without hesitation. The kidnapper reveals to the woman the code he intended to operate under. He would release the captives after 24 hours, but only under the condition that they do not cry. During the film, the kidnapper demonstrates various forms of physical and psychological torture on the group of women. Despite their best efforts, the captives are unable to hold back their tears, and one by one, they are murdered until only the protagonist remains. Frustrated by the protagonist's unremarkable resolve, the kidnapper takes more extreme measures, increasing intensity of her torture. However, the protagonist is not one to be messed with. Despite being tormented, she seems in control of the situation. She doesn't succumb to the traditional dynamics of torture. Even while on the wrong end of the bat, she isn't afraid to swing. She fights back how she can. She mocks and insults her captor, and it's then she finds his weakness. Although a physically empowering villain, he is emotionally fragile. Her grit frustrates him, causing him to lose focus and become noticeably rattled. As the protagonist continues to weaken her kidnapper with words, the subject in the audience notices what seems to be a slight echo in the dialogue. They look up to see if something is wrong with the speakers. They even wonder if this is a stylistic decision made by the director. But then they notice where it is coming from. They eventually realize that the two masked women sitting beside them are quietly repeating every line of dialogue as it occurs. Their lips moving causes their masks to shake softly. With each word, the air from their whispers blows the cloth away from their mouth, only for the mask to collapse back in when the syllable is completed. If the subject looks even closer, they will see that the lower half of the women's masks are saturated with saliva. Things don't get any more pleasant when the subject shifts their gaze down the woman's body. Just near their waists, their hands are clasped together so tightly that their fingernails are digging into their skin. They tremble and fidget, as if having taken on the burden of the world's anxiety, and no medication can calm them down. Fingernails dig deeper into their skin, drawing blood and foreshadowing the film's finale. At the film's climax, the kidnapper approaches the protagonist with a double-edged razor blade and announces that even if she is freed, she will spend the rest of her life horribly disfigured. This leads to an argument between the two, the subtext of which alludes to themes such as nature of inner and outer beauty, the value of women in society, and the societal stigma against expressions of vulnerability. The argument on the surface, however, does not sound sophisticated or profound. There is no consolation for a fight having emotional depths. At the end of the day, the blows will always feel more physical than intellectual. Eventually, the kidnapper loses patience and grabs the protagonist by the shoulders and slams her to the floor. He reaches out his hands and grabs her by the face. The subject's attention is again pulled from the screen when they hear groaning from every direction. The wordless hums fill the theater with a sense of worry and uneasiness. So much so that the subject feels the room getting smaller as the air polluted with angst grows thicker. As the subject brings their eyes back to the film, they see the kidnapper gripping the protagonist's lower lip between his thumb and forefinger, squeezing tight as to pop her lip like a balloon. The kidnapper then takes the razor blade to the victim's lips. He pauses to mock the protagonist, and while he does this, blinded by pride and arrogance, she jolts into action, grabbing the razor right out of his hands with her teeth. She follows up her burglary with assault. Her neck stabs forward, and in a blur, she stabs the kidnapper's eyes out. It happens in an instant. The kidnapper has no time to react. Blood spills from his face. Screams pour out of his mouth. During this time, the protagonist maneuvers the razor into her fingers. She hacks away at her bindings, but they are stubborn and resist her sawing. The battle continues, and the kidnapper is able to tear off the victim's lips entirely. She looks like a monster now. As the kidnapper smiles and celebrates his wrongdoings, the protagonist finishes freeing herself and slits the kidnapper's throat with the razor. The protagonist locates the exit and scrambles towards it as the kidnapper bleeds to death on the cold, hard floor. The protagonist then speaks her final words. Due to her injuries, her voice is muffled and raspy. She bears down and calmly speaks. One last time, she mocks the kidnapper, telling him that he cried tears of blood and therefore had to die according to his own rules. During this climax, it is reported that the subjects experience a sense of dread unique to any other terror ever felt. Strangely, the feeling appeared not to correspond to the scene in the film at all. It is a feeling entirely separate from the viewing experience, as if for a moment, the subject is taken out of the moment in time and transported to a realm composed only of fear and anxiety. But just as quickly as they left, they returned. The Foundation sees it worth mentioning that this peculiar moment happens to occur during the film's most clearly recalled scene. While descriptions of violence vary from one viewer to the next, the climax is unshakable in its consistency. This is further evidence that SCP-5040 has a core foundation that remains intact. False memories are given validity by our peers. When we tell a story, the inaccuracies are often the best parts, the exaggerated drama, the rearranged sequence of events, the jokes you thought of in retrospect, but weaved into later accounts. While a storyteller knows when to lie, a good storyteller knows how to not get caught. SCP-5040 captivates its audience, but it seems to know how much it can get away with. By providing a consistent, objective truth, a climax that is reported the same across all accounts, SCP-5040 insists, even if only briefly, on being a credible film, not just a random sequence of 24 frames per second. Eyes back to the screen, the film abruptly cuts to an unspecified point in the future. Now wearing a face mask to hide her disfigured mouth, no different than the one seen worn in the theater, the protagonist walks down the street to her apartment, indifferent to the crowd of paparazzi that follows her. It is clear that this is now just a part of her life. The lights flash on her face. When she reaches her bedroom, the protagonist slowly pulls down her mask. Face free from cloth, she stares at herself in the mirror. It is silent. What she sees is less notable than what she doesn't. The lower portion of her face is gone. She focuses only on that. It's hard to know if she will ever see into her own eyes again. Her gaze might forever be fixed on what she can't get back. And through those eyes that long to see more, she sheds a single tear. Over the course of several minutes, her weeping gradually builds into frenzied sobs and shrieks. It can first be misinterpreted as bad acting, a case of doing too much. But as the crying carries onward, it's understood that the horror in her wallowing is all too real. The film cuts to black and the credits roll, but the sound of the protagonist's cries continue to play with no other audio until the credit reel ends. And even then, in silence, it's hard to say if she ever stopped crying. Audience members remain silent after the movie ends, exchanging only whispers as they exit the theater. Feet step over small red puddles and stains on the theater floor as if they are sticky puddles of soda. Those who remain past this point experience an escalating feeling of unwelcomeness until sitting and staying is more physically demanding than getting up and walking out. Some experiences will stay with you forever, even if they never actually happened. Now go check out SCP-592 Inaccurate History Book and SCP-2030 Laugh is Fun for more media that'll stick in your brain forever.